you're saying is true, this industry will bleed.
If it burgeons further from here, and if it snowballs from here, and if we have several weeks and months of lack of LPG supply, it could become an existential crisis.
In most of our own restaurants so far, the problem is not more acute than that. It's just that we're going down a slope, and it's going to get harder and harder and harder.
Hello and welcome. My name is Sanket Upadhyay. You're watching me on The Federal. The show is called AI with Sanket. This is the AI of news because news in India today requires not artificial but analytical intelligence. The government would want you to believe that there is no crisis. There is rumor mongering, there is panic mongering around LPG and piped gas cylinders or piped gas, natural gas. However, there is no crisis on the ground. But the reality is that a crisis already exists. And the biggest proof of that crisis is that the government has imposed the Essential Commodities Act of 1955, which means the government realizes that it needs to manage the supply. And understandably so. There is a war going on. It has affected the flow of gas and LPG in this country. But while the government is trying to prioritize where the gas should go, where it shouldn't, has the hotel and restaurant industry been the hardest hit? You see, while you do prioritize and supply it domestically, one must realize that hotels and restaurants of all shapes and sizes, great and small, are actually a backbone of the economy. They provide employment. They provide the wheels of the economy to churn. There is a whole ecosystem of vendors, of waiters, of managers, of delivery partners, Swiggy, Zomato. There is a whole industry which is being affected. Is the hotel and restaurant industry in this country in a deep, deep state of crisis? And can it get a lot worse if they're not listened to? We put that to a discussion by speaking to two top restaurateurs of this country. Mr. A.D. Singh is the owner of the Olive Group of restaurants. And we speak to Mr. Zorawar Kalra, who's the influential restaurateur and founder of Massive Restaurants. Both of them have very interesting things to say. This is a very interesting conversation. So I would request you to please watch it till the very end. Let's start the discussion. And joining us right now is Mr. Zorawar Kalra. As you all know, he's India's most influential restaurateurs and founder of Massive Restaurants. You may have been to one of them, from Farzi Cafe, Masala Library, Papaya, Bowtie, Louis Burger, Swan. The list just goes on and on. Mr. Zorawar, thank you so much for joining us on The Federal.
Pleasure to be here with you, Sanket.
It's not a happy occasion for any of us, actually, with this sort of crisis. As a hotelier, restaurateur, would you like to share your inputs, your concerns, or what you've just experienced over the past few days?
You know, this takes me back to 2020 September, not even September, actually 2020 March. The 20th of March 2020 was the day I believe Prime Minister Modi had announced a lockdown, and it immediately created a sense of absolute ambiguity in the minds of the industry and the fraternity. And of course, the lockdown, I mean, it was far greater than for the industry, it was for the whole world. But at that point in time, it almost created, within about 15, 20 days, we started thinking about an existential crisis, a crisis that could technically be so long lasting and so devastating that it could leave a lot of morbidity in its wake. And I think, I don't think we're at that stage at the moment, but it definitely, if it burgeons further from here, and if it snowballs from here, and if we have several weeks and months of lack of LPG supply, it could become an existential crisis. Already many restaurants and hotels around the country have either completely truncated their menus or are on the verge of shutdown. Many of my places even in tier 2 and tier 3 cities, where you would say that, because of rationing, etc., you could have decent supply. we have problems across the board. So yeah, it is a problem that is will become existential in nature sooner if quick action isn't taken. And the government was very forthcoming during the earlier COVID crisis. They were able to give us essential services status, and obviously make other amenities available whereby we were able to continue to feed the nation. And that's our job as an industry. We're the second largest employer of humans in India after agriculture. We employ directly 8 million people and another 8 million through ancillary industries. We are a top contributor to the GDP. Between 2 and 3% of this country, the fourth largest economy in the world, we contribute between 2 and 3% of that. That's a 6.6 lakh crore ecosystem, both the organized and the unorganized, where I think 44% odd is unorganized and 56% is organized. So that's about 1,800 crores a day of revenue being added by the industry to the GDP of the country, and even a single day's supply stoppage, assuming that 75% of this 1,800 crore is based on LPG, which means those restaurants may not be able to serve people, you may have a loss per day of 1,200 to 1,300 crores. So it's a big impact situation, but it's more than just the financial. Forget about the financial aspect, right? It's war times. We all have to work together. We all have to conserve. All of that kind of stuff is we're fully in agreement. In fact, I represent the NRAI. I'm the vice president of the NRAI, which is the largest restaurant body in the country. We represent thousands of restaurants and thousands of members, in fact, and lakhs of restaurants. And we've issued a advisory on how to conserve alternate forms of cooking, et cetera, et cetera. But we would really require some urgent aid, because failing that, this could lead to closure of many restaurants. What about the smaller players? There are smaller ones that rely on their one cylinder a week to be able to feed their families. A small dhaba guy. By the way, in Delhi, the dhaba guy can't even burn his tandoor, because in Delhi charcoal is banned because of GRAP measures. So he actually has no form of cooking. He can't even cook a simple tandoori roti in that tandoor of his. So it is a significant issue. We're hoping that there will be immediate action taken, and our asks are fairly simple. And I'm sure we'll get into this in further detail. But our asks are only two. We ask that we be given essential services status, whereby certain amenities can be provided. And second, a mandate given by the authorities, by the Petroleum Ministry, by the MOFPI, etc., to the oil producers to ensure that the commercial cylinder, which is the 19 kg cylinder, which is the only cylinder we're allowed to use, is made available. Even if it is rationed, I understand production has fallen. India only produces 40% of its LPG. 60% comes from imports, and 90% of that 60% comes from the Hormuz Strait. So we understand the problem and we're willing to work with it. But at the same time, you can't just make it zero. Right now, in some cases, the oil companies have completely clamped down on commercial cylinders, and we can't use the domestic ones. We're not allowed to. And our gas banks are not set up for that. And plus, it's illegal, and the industry will never propone or condone anything illegal. So it's a matter of now these two simple measures that could save the second largest employer of humans in India, that industry.
I think, Mr. Zorawar, you have, in a very succinct way, explained the magnitude and scale of a possible problem which is growing. First of all, the size and the expanse of your industry, and then if it is not fed or if the raw materials are not provided, the problem it can create. Mr. Kalra, when the government says that commercial LPG will only be 20 or 30% affected, 70 to 80% they will still be in production. Do you feel the problem is far more than what the government seems to be saying? Because even now with the Essential Commodities Act in place, you are still supposed to be 70 to 80% in action.
No, I don't think we've been included in the Essential Commodities Act. I don't think we're being affected by that. And also, my news is alternative in nature slightly. What we've been told is not 70 to 80% will be provided. Mine is maybe 10 to 20% will be made available. So it's the opposite. It's not that 70 or 80% will be provided. It's 70 to 80% will be stemmed. 10 to 20% may be provided. And at this point in time, in certain cases, there's a complete clampdown, which means there are no commercial cylinders available. So there's no commercial LPG available in the bulk of the country.
This is really surprising, Mr. Kalra, because I've read the Essential Commodities Act in the provisions, and it says that the average of the last 6 month use, 70% of that will be made available. If you want, I can read this out. It's a government order, because what you seem to be suggesting is absolutely opposite to what the government seems to be saying. And that is very surprising, because if what you're saying is true, this industry will bleed.
No, so Sanket, I'm not privy to the exact act that you're reading out to, but we're not included in that act yet. So commercial LPG is not covered under this. That is where the problem is. The commercial LPG is not covered under this act as far as I'm aware, because if it was and we were getting 70 to 80% supply, we would not be having the scarcity that we're seeing. So commercial LPG is not covered under this, domestic, as far as I'm aware. But obviously,
that's very interesting. I'm just reading this out for your benefit and the benefit of viewers. 100% assured supply to domestic piped gas and home CNG for vehicles. 80% of the previous 6 month average supply to tea industries connected through natural gas grid. 80% of the previous 6 months supply to industrial and commercial natural gas consumers. So it is not LPG,
CNG.
It's for natural gas, piped natural gas.
Correct. So the CNG and PNG is not even affected. In fact, the 80% of that, in fact, those are all in very limited spaces. 25% of the 6.6 lakh crore system I'm talking about, only 25% uses CNG or PNG. So those 25% will not be affected. That's why I gave you the calculation on the loss on 75%. So commercial LPG is totally not covered under this.
This is massive then, because if most of the hotel and restaurant industry, it uses LPG commercial cylinders, and if that will virtually vanish, then, for big players, maybe you will be able to absorb that loss to some extent, but the small players will just vanish. I mean, the vendors, the hawkers, small restaurants, there is absolutely no chance that they have.
Yeah, and that's what the sadness is. And we at the NRAI are representative of everybody, not just the big players. We represent the small players, in fact, in larger numbers. So the smaller player will not have the sophisticated purchase systems or vendor management systems. They will not have the inventory holding cost capability to be able to stock cylinders. So what happens to these people is that their entire livelihood is at stake. And even for the larger hotels and restaurants, if there's no supply, you will have, what option do you have? You either have to shut down the kitchen or go to a very small menu, which is 20-30%, which nobody wants to eat, which includes things like, fried stuff and electric stuff, right? Whatever you can make in an oven or you can make in a fryer. That's about the only thing. And many ovens also today are gas run. I have pizza ovens in many of my pizza places, which are all gas driven because they are those, Italian dome style, proper wood fired ones. They have gas and wood that they use. So we have a huge challenge ahead of us. And I'm hopeful. I know that the committees have been set up. Yesterday, for example, the NRAI spoke with the leaders of the oil companies. We have further meetings today happening in Mumbai as we speak with other senior leaders of the oil companies to help provide us with some kind of a hope, some kind of a light at the end of the tunnel. What can they do? If they have been mandated to not provide commercial, they cannot provide it. So one is obviously we'll be approaching the government, and government is always reasonable in these regards because they know that we are an important industry. And actually we should be given essential industry or essential services status immediately. Unfortunately, like you read out, we're not covered in that Essential Commodities Act. Perhaps by including us, that'll help us. But in general, by ensuring that the mandate to these oil companies is to not clamp down on the LPG cylinders, commercial LPG cylinders, as well as to ask them to raise production within whatever limit they can. They don't have a magic button that they can press it and suddenly production will double. That's not going to happen, right? We all know that. But if they can at least ask them to ramp up production to the best of their capability. We spoke with them yesterday, and some of the top people at, I won't mention the name of the oil company, but one of the largest oil companies in India, there are three. One of those three actually said that it's possible to increase by about 15%. Their production capability. So if they can increase by 15% and all of them increase by 15%, so the total corpus, so the 40% internal production, if that increases by 15%, you're still looking at a 16% or 6% odd jump. So at 40% becomes 50%, at least 10% buffer is there, and perhaps that 10% can be allocated to restaurants and hotels. because hotels are shutting down. Imagine a large hotel that relies on LPG, because not everybody has piped CNG or PNG. Usually, for me, less than 20% of my system has piped PNG or CNG, and less than 20% of my restaurants have, or my cloud kitchens rather, have electric. So those are the only ones not getting affected. Everything else is.
And my final question, Mr. Zorawar, if this does not get sorted out soon, what is your worst fear? Complete shutdown, which will then translate into loss of job, loss of pay, loss of performance of ancillary units like Swiggy, Zomato, gig workers. A whole economy will collapse.
It is an existential crisis, or rather, it can become an existential crisis, which is what we're worried about. But I'm hopeful. We are constantly, optimistic. We're eternal optimists in our industry. Our industry is a very tough industry. We have the highest morbidity rate of any industry in the world. So if you're entering the restaurant industry, you're technically most probably 90% optimist. So we're very optimistic that situation won't come. Alternative forms of LPG will be imported by the government into the country. The producers within India, the three large incredible companies that we have, they'll start increasing their supply. The complete clampdown on the current supply by the government will be removed, and we'll have to resort to alternative forms of cooking. Like I said, a mandate has already been passed. Electric, you can't suddenly develop a PNG and CNG line. That's not going to happen for several months, right? It has to be laid across several kilometers. It's not going to happen randomly at a single restaurant. But alternative forms of cooking, reduced menus. But yes, if this calamity does not soon pass, you could see mass closures. And you could see 8 million plus 8 million, so 16 million people. Their jobs could be at stake, and that's the second largest employer of humans in India after agriculture. So that's actually something very big, but we're hopeful. Like I said, we're eternal optimists. We don't see that happening. We're praying, and we're very hopeful that something will be resolved. Imports have to be increased. Domestic production has to be increased. Clampdown on commercial LPG has to be removed. We have to be given essential services status. I think these 3 or 4 things are enough to help us tide by. We're a very resilient industry. We came out of the COVID stronger than arguably any other industry. We survived. Indians love eating out. Indians need to eat out. It's no longer about love or desire. It's about need. Many people, young ones, don't have even a chula at home. They don't even have a gas connection. They rely on Swiggy, Zomato, or dining out for existing, for surviving. So those people could be at risk, because most of the cloud kitchens in India, I would say the vast majority, like I said, not even in the cloud kitchen space, over 80-90% would be reliant on LPG. So you're looking at an entire shutdown of the Swiggy and Zomato ecosystem. Forget about the collateral damage to the gig workers, but there is just generally going to be mayhem. But like I said, we're eternally optimistic. We don't think this will last that long. We hope that the war stops, but we can't control the war. But I know the government has set up a special committee to figure out other forms on how to help the hotel and restaurant industries. And by increasing imports and the other things that I said, I think this issue can be to some extent mitigated. But at this point in time, it's a very scary situation, and we're on this 24/7. We're dealing with our internal members. We're addressing issues on a constant basis. We're obviously addressing the media. Channels such as yours are going to help us spread the word, make the authorities also realize the kind of pain that we're facing, and we're very hopeful. But yes, at this point in time, it's a scary situation.
Hang in there, Mr. Zorawar Kalra. I'm sure Indians will come rushing to your restaurants and will eat out. And hopefully this crisis will show signs of ebbing. Thank you very much for putting things in perspective so beautifully for us to understand the magnitude of a possible problem. It still exists, but it could get a lot worse. Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Zorawar.
Thank you.
Joining us right now is Mr. A.D. Singh. He's a famous restaurateur. He's famously known as the guy who got us the olive bar and kitchen, and in the present context is really affected by the LPG crisis. Of course, it's not there for, the government says it's not there for domestic LPG users, but what about restaurants? What is the situation? Mr. Singh, thank you so much for speaking to the Federal. What would you like to share with us?
So, Sanket, to begin with, I think all of us realize that this war is not going to probably not going to get over tomorrow. It's going to take some time. And the situation is just getting worse and worse. It's not our government's fault, but what is the best way forward looking at the big picture? See, today in India, many people don't even have kitchens anymore. The world has changed. They eat after work or they have delivery at home. How are they going to survive if restaurants don't survive? Second thing, you have to realize that we are amongst the largest employers of people in the country. And if we have to close down because of this shortage, what happens to all of them? We won't be able to afford to pay anybody. That's a huge, huge crisis around the corner for all of us. Thirdly, also, I think the government should prioritize that in tough times, in fact, in all times, the people that didn't break in a restaurant with their families or their friends helps them get through the toughest of times. And so it's very important at so many levels to support the industry as much as they can. We appreciate it's a very difficult time for everybody. Currently, the way it's looking, the supply of LPG is already down. It's varying state to state, city to city. In some, it's they're only supplying domestically and to hospitals and education institutions. In some, they still supply, but like at about 80%. Some cities have options like piped gas. Some don't have options. As you know, probably 70-80% of restaurants use LPG to cook. Piped gas is a much smaller percentage. And of course, every restaurant owner, all teams are trying their best, trying to adjust menus. But you have to realize that, we're a reasonably large company, but from so much of the sector is disorganized, I'd say over 50%. And they don't have space to store. They can't easily convert from one form to another. There are options like induction options, but they cost money. So the overall, the F&B sector, the restaurant sector is facing a very, very difficult time ahead. Restaurants have already started closing, and depending on how this plays out with gas supply and then the other areas that get affected like ingredient supply, prices, etc., we may see the entire sector closing down the longer this goes on. So it's a very, very difficult time for us.
Mr. Singh, we'll talk about the industry and the problem in general with greater detail, but I just wanted to know, how are you coping with this? Because you lead such a large company of restaurants. How are you dealing with this situation? Is there a crisis, very obviously, and how are you managing?
So, as I said, varies from city to city. In Delhi, a lot of my restaurants are on piped gas. So for now, they are okay. Ingredients so far are reasonably available in some markets, and the prices have remained stable so far. So in some markets, we are still able to manage. In the other markets, we've already started buying or renting, depending on availability, induction options. The Olive brand has a lot of grills and like pizza ovens. So the ranges are only a part of what we cook on, and we're trying to replace them with induction ranges as required. The chefs and the teams are also analyzing, assessing every day, and looking at making smaller menus, which could be turned out with less requirement of gas, which could be turned out with induction cooking. So the whole process has started. Sanket, as I mentioned earlier, the problem is that as every day passes, it's only getting worse. And the entire industry has to be prepared for even more and more difficult times, less supply, and we're very worried about being able to manage at all.
Exactly, Mr. Singh. And when you read about the government saying that, number one, there is no crisis. Number two, there is disturbance because obviously the Strait of Hormuz is where most of the supply comes from. That is affected. There are measures being taken. And in the short term, we will be able to ramp up our own production of LPG. At the same time, get in supplies from other places as well. Now, we know that this, even if the government says is short term, will affect the supply lines and then eventually will affect the restaurants. It is already affecting people. I was there yesterday outside a gas agency, and I can tell you, Mr. Singh, even for domestic LPG, there were huge lines. Given a situation like this, are you concerned that you may be looking at a partial or full closure of your restaurants in the short term till such time things get better?
Yes, Sanket, if you're following, I'm sure you are, the major oil suppliers in the world have already either shut down or substantially slowed production because they're not able to get it to markets. And they've also shared that even if the Strait of Hormuz opens again, it'll take them a few weeks to ramp up production back to normal levels. So my estimation is that at least for a few months, the market's going to be badly affected. I appreciate the government's efforts to try their best. Other sources ramp up their own production, bring out some of their reserves. The entire industry, my own group, we're all very worried because they prioritize hospitals, which of course should be first priority, domestic, but the restaurants and hotels need to be prioritized in the balance to the best of what the government's trying to do. Of course, I urge, and all my fellow restaurateurs also are doing their best, trying to manage through this very difficult time. But it's looking like it's going to get a lot worse. And we're very worried whether we'll be able to keep our staff, keep business going, at what levels. And we're doing our best to stay in business as long as we can.
Mr. Singh, this sounds a lot like 6 years ago when the lockdown had hit all of us. Similar concerns, similar questions, the government's nudge that don't sack anyone, keep paying salaries. At the same time, businessmen such as yourself or others had a huge problem in sustaining. How do I sustain when everything is shut? And we are in a similar situation. Mr. Singh, you see, restaurants and this business have a lot of ancillary units feeding off. For instance, delivery partners, Swiggy, Zomato, right? Gig workers, staff that you hire, cooks that you hire. So there is an economy.
Yeah.
Exactly, waiters. Do you feel that this whole chain has already been affected? And soon we could be looking at situations where people lose jobs, or if not jobs, scaling down of operations considerably.
Sanket, there's no question. The entire ecosystem has already started to be affected, and our worry from our understanding of how the world is and the steps that can be taken are already being taken, is that it's going to get a lot more affected. Remember also, Sanket, that every person who works for us, I'd say on the average supports maybe 4 to 6 people. So, that also is a huge impact on the wider economy across the country. at all levels. And I think that that's a real worry for the government, for the economy, for the restaurant industry, for people who are dependent on us at this stage and for the next few months.
It's not very encouraging to hear you. You sound a little or very concerned with the way things are. But when you hear the government impose the Essential Commodities Act and essentially say 70% supply or 80% supply for commercial LPG will continue, then technically the problem should only be 20% or 30%. Do you feel that the problem is far more acute?
It varies, as I said, state to state. In most of our own restaurants so far, the problem is not more acute than that. It's just that we're going down a slope, and it's going to get harder and harder and harder, even for organized players like ourselves. And also, Sanket, you realize restaurateurs like myself and so many of us who are who represent the larger industry and so many smaller players, we're also very worried about all of them. And for them, the problem has already started becoming quite acute. I'm sure you're hearing of places that are shutting down every day, every hour already.
No, I like this side of you, Mr. Singh. While you are a very successful businessman and restaurateur, at the same time, this very socialist way of thinking of being concerned about that small player, that little hawker, that vendor with a small little cylinder, they are the ones who will really be impacted. And I really appreciate that you have them in your thoughts, even though they don't directly affect you. So that's very encouraging to see. Ends sooner than the many months that you seem to be mentioning, because a crisis which goes for perhaps more than a week or 10 days is a massive crisis. Its impact, the cascading effect, will be very hard to manage. Thank you so much, Mr. Singh, for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.